Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining today's webinar. We'll give just a second for folks to pile into the room. Move this over here. All right. We'll go ahead and get started. So thank you everyone for joining our webinar today. Today we're featuring a topic on cybersecurity risk management. We're welcoming Jack Compton and Harrison Tropp from our IB corporate members, SGP advisors, as well as Paul Bamert of IB member case status. This webinar is being recorded and we will send the recording out on the listserv following the session. If you have any questions, you're welcome to put them in the Q&A box, which should be located at the bottom of your Zoom screen. I will be able to see your questions as well as our panelists. So we're going to talk today about why law firms are a target, how to assess risk. We'll talk about things like compliance and legal requirements, building client trust through cybersecurity, and some best practices and recommendations for your firm. So a fun fact about one of our panelists, Paul, is that he and Case Status have a podcast called Ethical-ish. I thought I would mention that to everybody here. It's a resource for lawyers and legal consumers that explores the ethical dimensions of modern law practice, focusing on transparency and integrity. So if you're looking for a good podcast to check out, again, it's Ethical-ish. And you can find it on all your normal podcast outlets. Before I hand things over to Paul and the gang, I wanted to remind you about one thing, which is our next event is IB Summit. It's happening this October in Savannah, Georgia, 9th through the 12th, I think, to be precise. Our summit event is our annual member-to-member focused sessions on education in the form of little like miniature TED Talks. Big part of it is member-to-member education. And then Judy Cheney, our director of events, she always sprinkles in some really fun networking activities, things that focus on getting our members together and getting to know each other better. So if you have not already registered, don't miss out. There's the QR code for your convenience. All right, I will stop sharing, and gentlemen, I will allow you to take over.
All right, so I'm going to be the technical lead. Welcome, everybody. Glad to have you, whether you're hearing us live or on the recording. And thanks to Injury Board for being our gracious hosts here today. And also to Harrison and Jack for letting Case Status join in. Super excited to talk about cybersecurity. It's an important topic in every business. Carla, as you mentioned, why we're under attack as law firms is because we're in business in many ways. But there are also other drivers there we need to be aware of. So I'll turn it over to Jack and Harrison to sort of introduce who SGP Advisors is. I'll introduce Case Status and we'll dive in.
Awesome. Thanks, Paul. And likewise, I appreciate everybody joining today. A little bit about SGP Advisors. We've been around roughly 30 years, and we're an insurance agency that strictly specializes in working with law firms. We work with law firms of every shape, size, practice area, and geographic region throughout the United States. We've worked with a number of Injury Board member firms for a long time, including some of the founders, Patrick and Tom, and we're based here in Tampa where they are as well. And so we rejoined Injury Board earlier this year and are really excited about that partnership and look forward to hopefully adding value and working with the member firms.
Awesome. And Jack, I'm Paul Bamert. I'm the VP of Marketing at Case Status, and I apologize for any noise in the background. I'm here in uptown Charlotte, North Carolina at the Omni Hotel where NCAJ is meeting. And excited though to be on this topic. Right, Jack and Harrison come from sort of the advisor insurance side. We're a little bit younger company, founded in 2017. Of course, we're technology. We're all about client engagement, and AI has become center to that, getting your client data to work for you and come out of your single source of truth, which is your case management system securely. Our technology is all about keeping data in motion and data at rest secure, and using channels that we're going to talk about today that are more secure than the legacy channels that your businesses are used to working on. So we live and breathe security because we're in the cloud, and we believe that it is a place where legal tech and all technology needs to be going forward on. We have hundreds of law firms out there across lots of different practice areas, over 1 million clients, trust law firms that use case status, and we are SOC 2 Type 2 certified. We'll talk about the importance of that. And as Jack mentioned, proud injury board member. Couldn't be happier than to be in this group and continuing to have these provocative discussions. And Carla, thanks for shouting out ethical-ish. I will say it's a fun play on the idea, but there is a lot of security in that podcast that we're trying to hit on, because again, you may not lose your bar license over some of these things, but your brand is always, sort of in the crosshairs if you're not careful with these topics. So we love bringing it to you. So I'm going to keep us going on the topic, but Harrison and Jack, just interrupt if I miss any of the points that we talked about in preparation. Our agenda, as we talked about what we could cover, we wanted it to be as valuable as possible as you take this back to your daily execution. We're going to introduce a few ideas in the stats and the news and some of the things that are changing and to be aware of. But then we're going to dive into sort of this idea of how can you prevent a lot of these incidents from taking place, and then how do you remediate? I'm going to take on a little bit of the prevention side of it, although Harrison and Jack will chime in. The remediation is a little bit more of their territory, so we'll kind of break it up. But we'll have some closing topics, or closing remarks, and plenty of time for Q&A, I believe. So if you've got some questions, throw them in the queue and make sure to get them answered. So we'll start with stats and news. Harrison, again, you and Jack, chime in if I miss anything on this, but I think we'll start with the common cyber threats. And this is, law firms, the legal space, we're no different than the rest of industries out there. We're all under attack. This is a common thread. The bad actors are out there. They're trying to, there's industries, they're trying to make money out of these types of social engineering, phishing, rogue employee, and ransomware attacks. So be aware of the different ones out there. Again, they sometimes use our human capital against us. The social engineering, where they will show up with your staff, with different folks who have no malicious intent, but they're just being manipulated by these bad actors. Phishing is also something that we'll see, a type of social engineering where they're basically looking for information, trying to extract personal information. And there's a lot of different forms that this can come from. It can look like it's coming from a client. It could look like it's coming from a partner, a referral, law firm, etc. There are rogue employees out there, so you do need to be aware of where data breaches come from within. Sometimes those folks that we trust the most aren't adhering to what we want them to adhere to from policies and procedures. So we have to make sure that we vet correctly and maintain training and keep an eye on our team. And then last but not least, ransomware. This is big business because it is business, right? I think Harrison and Jack can talk about this. It's all about sort of holding your key assets in the form of digital information hostage until you make a payout. There's a negotiation involved, right? And when that payout happens, they move on, and it's a business model as much as it's anything, and it's worth sort of breaking down further. Harrison or Jack, anything else to add to these common threats in your experience?
Thanks, Paul. I'll add real quick that, I see firms all the time thinking that, well, this isn't going to apply to me, or this isn't relevant in the space we're in. And I would say that you really can't be further from the truth there. This isn't a if scenario, it's a when scenario. And although your AmLaw 200 or AmLaw 100 firms do get the publicity when it comes to data breaches, just as many 10 lawyer firms, 5 lawyer firms, et cetera, are just as susceptible to these types of incidents. So I would caution all firms out there that are not aware of the cyber risk to certainly educate themselves, or use a platform like Injury Board to become educated. But the reality is that fraudsters do not discriminate between firm size or practice demographic. And so, again, I would advise all firms to familiarize themselves with the threats. Next slide.
Yeah, sorry, I was trying to get my unmute as I share. It's hard to get the little unmute. Great point, Harrison. And I think that the thing you have to think about the bad actors is they're using technology that is like one to many. So they can scale the attack. So if you have a domain name, if you're registered as a entity, they can find you, right? And they're just setting up attack after attack and letting it scale. So to your point, it doesn't matter how big you are. That's not the target game. It's an immersion game on their side. So The ransomware attacks, I think this is worth double clicking on that last bullet just because it's so common. It's surging, 67% growth. These, the growth in the last 2 years is way up, and half of the claims, as Harrison and Jack can attest, is really coming into play. And again, it's a business model for these bad actors. There's almost honor amongst thieves, right? They hold your data hostage. They ask for a ransom. You get into a negotiation. We were just talking about it here with some attorneys in North Carolina. Sometimes you can bring them down on their Bitcoin ask, but ultimately you pay it out, and you're hopeful that they deliver it, and they typically deliver it because they want the future folks to pay out the ransom, on the next one, right? So it's kind of a crazy idea, right, Harrison and Jack, that there is honor amongst thieves in it.
There is.
Yeah.
And I told Jack this morning that I'm dealing with a ransomware attack for one of our clients as recently as 11:30 this morning. And so a 70 lawyer firm out west, full service firm, just had a ransomware attack. So we're working on that now. So yeah, you can't speak enough about it, and the stats are very sobering. But you'll get to situations where you go through a claim, and to your point, Paul, about the honesty amongst thieves. The thieves are pretty well known. I mean, I don't know how but whether you get your forensic review done, that these fraudsters are easily identifiable. So the repetition there is pretty common, unfortunately.
Yeah. No, it's crazy. And I think, Jack, we talked about it in the prep meeting. I mean, it's not just the monetary payment, it's also the interruption, right? The business costs, because you're down. I mean,
Right.
your business comes to a halt in many ways when your data's held hostage.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, there's obviously, as we alluded to, I mean, there's the actual ransom payment that the bad actors demand to give you your key, so to speak, and unlock your system. And a lot of time, most of the time, we see that number. They start $1 million plus. I mean, that's what they want when they get on a law firm's website and they see a bunch of partners. They see dollar signs, obviously, and they know that they think that there's deep pockets. And so, we'll get more into the insurance side of things later and how the insurance carrier handles that process and pays the ransom itself. But yeah, you're right. I mean, there's the soft cost of, number one, the firm is no longer operable. So you've got a business interruption aspect. The firm is shut down. You can't get into your system. You can't take new clients, all that good stuff. And then of course the remediation efforts, which we'll get into later as well, as far as notifying all the clients that have been affected and getting your firm back up and running. So there's a lot more than just paying the actual claim itself or the ransom claim.
Yeah, and we'll move on. The other thing with phishing and social engineering, it might all be combined, right? It can all lead to a ransomware attack in the end. So these things aren't mutually exclusive. They can all intertwine into events. Keeping on this idea of just the news and the stats, in Ethical-ish, I got the chance to sit down with law professor Constance Anastopoulos. She teaches ethics, talks about these things, and she dropped the stat in February with us since 2020, 750,000, 750,000 cyber attacks on law firms since 2020. So I think Harrison and Jack will talk a little bit about the rise there, but nearly 30% of law firms experienced a security breach last year. So ABA's legal technology survey report from 2023 is sort of citing these same things. I think the one thing that we'll talk a little bit more about is compromised email accounts. Email continues to be one of these gateways that these folks get into, but again, different reports coming from different places, they're all sort of saying the same things. And a little bit of public service announcement for you out there. We're not trainees. We're going to talk about how there's a lot of really good preferred partners out there. But you got to look for certain things, right? It looks like Wells Fargo. It says Wells Fargo, but when you look at the actual email address, it sort of leads you to believe, wait, Wells Fargo would never run under that sort of domain. This is a very common practice. You see it, in a lot of these different examples. Hovering the mouse over the call to action will typically expose that the call to action even has some weirdness to it. And this isn't just in email. You'll also see it come through in text. You'll see really odd domain names. It's hard to mask a lot of those things, but they will try to make it look and feel like it is a trusted entity. And sometimes they know you have a relationship with that trusted entity. That's where they really get this stuff right. But if you look closer, these are just examples of how these folks sort of break through.
I'll even add real quick, Paul. I had a client that went through a similar incident, and they created a fake email address, and the firm's name, let's just say it was at michael.com. Well, what they did was they put an R and an N together, ITHAEL, and so if you cursory review, an R and an N looks like an M. And so you really didn't even have to, hack infiltrate the network. You just created a fake domain name, sent it out to the partners at the firm to try and have a social engineering type incident occur. So they've come a long way from what I'll call the, Nigerian prince sort of scams, but they are quite sophisticated. So, so just keep that in mind as well.
Yeah, I think it's a good point, right? It doesn't always jump off the page like we're showing in these examples here.
Sure. Yep.
Sometimes haste, you maybe on a Saturday think you're doing something good by replying quickly, but to your point, that can turn into the downfall when you click on it and that R and that N look like an M. Man, that's a tough scheme right there.
Yeah.
All right, we'll keep going. Incidents versus breaches. So it's always, we're going to dive in this a little bit. And Harrison, Jack, and I talked a little bit about the education. I have to say that before meeting up with SGP, I'd never really thought about it in this way. Both of them have impact. The way I sort of delineate is all breaches are incidents in the beginning. The question is, can you, stop an incident before it comes breach? And I think the big thing is unauthorized access to sensitive data. As law firms, right, that sensitive data can come in a lot of different forms. It can be the privacy between attorney and client. Arguably, it could be healthcare data, right? Think about all the medical records that you're pulling through sometimes to handle the case, right? Unauthorized access to that type of information. You can even get personal identifiable information, maybe. Home address, I don't know about social security numbers, things like that. So it may not be legal client relationship. It may not be healthcare relationship. It may be just personal identifiable information. So think about cyber incidents and cyber breaches. They both have a cost, right, Harrison and Jack? But obviously some have more costs than the other. But what are your takeaways on understanding the difference between the two?
Yeah, an incident is obviously much more common and hopefully containable, right? So someone has maybe gotten into your system, and that's why time is always of the essence with these matters. Notifying your IT provider, notifying your cyber insurance carrier if you have a policy, because sometimes minutes can be the difference between the bad actor exfiltrating data or you're able to shut it down quickly. Most states have laws where if you believe that you've been the victim of a breach, you're required by law to notify any potentially affected party whose data may have been leaked. So now you're into having to notify all your clients, and we'll get into it later, but that's one piece of the insurance policy that they take over that process for you. But obviously a breach is more of a main scale event where they've shut down the system or they've definitely infiltrated and taken out data. So
point being, find the incidents early and prevent them from becoming the breach. We'll talk a little bit about that. Of course, the relevance for those of you out there, obviously Harrison, Jack, myself, we're not practicing attorneys. We're not even JDs unless Harrison and Jack have been holding back on me. But the ethical and security risks are yours, right? That's what Constance talks about, sort of that you guys as practitioners, own the responsibility of, ABA Model Rule 1.6, making all reasonable efforts to keep that client information confidential. And just about every bar, I cite Florida, right? We've got a lot of IB members and IB originating out of Florida, including SGPB. And so I was just looking at that 4.1.6, confidentiality of information. It's there. Everybody's aware of it. We just wanted to tie it back to the conversation that ultimately we want to avoid the ethical side of our bar licenses being at risk. We will talk a lot more that it may be more of a brand decision, right? A cost of business. That's the point of our podcast title, Ethical Ish. It's not always about getting disbarred or losing your license or even having your license in question, but it's about the cost to the entity that you've worked so hard to create. So we'll transition to the next one, prevention. I don't know, I haven't had a chance to look at the question queue, but Carla or Harrison or Jack, if somebody comes in and we want to inject a question from the audience, let me know. I will break the rhythm. But let's talk a little bit about prevention. So this is big in the case status world, part of the way we're trying to implement technology. Yes, we're helping with communication and engagement, but we're trying to help mitigate the risk through getting through a new type of communication that's secure end to end. But before we do that, we know you're going to go back to your law firms today. You're not going to implement case status, or you may not have case status in the hunt at the moment. So let's just think about the things you can be doing first and foremost. First is you need to have some policies around passwords and access. This comes into roles of systems, could be your case management system, could be other systems that you have, but you need to have some thought of level and credentials and limit where, sort of it's the military on a need to know basis. Only if it's need to know, it's part of the work duties. Multi-factor authentication. This is almost ubiquitous, should be. If you're not using it, I think Harrison and Jack will talk about this, like that can be actually something that can prevent you from being insured. It's expected. And it really does ensure that the person that's trying to access it is who they say they are. And it requires some things that will, help ensure that. Of course, secure Wi-Fi's. Here I am in the middle of the Omni, and there is a show Wi-Fi. There's also the free Wi-Fi. I stay away from those on my work machine and actually on my personal machine. I'm actually on a hotspot, and that's a security decision. Yeah, I have to have good connection so you guys can hear me, but secure Wi-Fi or running a VPN if you're not on a secure Wi-Fi is important. So you need to think about that if you have staff that's out there working remotely and or on the road a lot. If they're having to pick up the airports and the free Wi-Fi, that can open your team up to different types of attacks that we talked about before. And then log information. Again, multi-factor authentication helps to ensure these things, but enforce strong passwords, enforce changing them regularly, enforce not being able to reuse, right? And use the use of password managers makes it easier for those staff members to adhere to those policies because they're all there. Harrison, Jack, I'll pause there to see if there are any things you would add. I know we've got a few more on the mitigating, but
yeah, I would add, it was the VPN especially. I mean, we saw a lot during COVID where you had attorneys and attorney staff that were, accessing information via a non-VPN source. And, my point to firms is that from an insurance perspective, an insurance carrier is not insuring 100 different Wi-Fi networks. They're ensuring the integrity of your system, the integrity of your network. So to try and, think of it as, well, I can just access what I want when I want, to your point, on a hotel, free Wi-Fi, et cetera. It doesn't work that way. And so that was kind of a revolutionary thought for a lot of people that sort of weren't logging in remotely, or that were logging in remotely, but weren't doing it via VPN, that there are serious consequences because of that. And again, the amount of firms we come across that use post-it note passwords and just keep it on, keep it on their desk. I mean, that's an unfortunate reality. And I don't think anything we're mentioning here on mitigating the risk is revolutionary, but the amount of firms that really don't employ it is also still surprising. So it's something just to remember that these are easy methods to employ as a firm.
yeah. But as with any organization, right, it starts at the top. It starts with having policies. It starts with sort of drilling to those policies on a regular basis. So great segue, Harrison. Common sense. You get in the car, put your seatbelt on. Common sense applies where we're, putting those policies on the previous page, but also when we're looking at the things that are coming through. We want to, think about whether we were expecting an email. We get these things all the time at Case Status where they're saying that they're our CEO and they're soliciting gift cards. I mean, regular basis. It's amazing. So expectation, we know what's going on. Train employees, we're going to talk about that at the bottom. Train. There's a lot of providers out there, including these preferred vendors that Harrison and Jack can attest to. Anti-malware, a lot of things that you can run on your machines that it help to ensure what's going on. Pick up the phone, verify. Sometimes when you get something and you're not sure, look them up, call the official number, talk to them, and make sure everything's good. And have a response plan. In our business, we call it a BCDR plan, business continuity, disaster recovery, and usually that has an incident response concept to it. but you want to detect quickly, contain, right? Keep the incident an incident, investigate, remediate, and recover. So,
And I'll add,
yeah,
test the plan. It's not,
good point.
don't wait for the first time to be a data breach. You want to make sure that that is part of a monthly or quarterly testing that you can do, and your IT department can actually simulate a data breach, shut down your network, pick out your hard copy binders, call the appropriate parties, and go from there. But I would highly recommend testing that.
Yeah, it's like a fire. I don't know how many times your building in Tampa has a fire drill. Our building does it maybe once or twice a year, and we don't ever have a fire. But you're right, Harrison. You should definitely test against that. I wanted to just comment a little bit more on the email. And again, Harrison, Jack, are you guys here? Hopefully there's not a delay. I see it in the video, but hopefully you guys are getting my audio okay here. The guidance from the Florida bar, I called it out before on the the bar rule, but the Florida State Bar and a lot of the other state bars are even going further, right? So we get into this idea of a secure client portal, and that's where we're passionate here at Case Status. And that's why you find me wanting to be in a conversation like this as an IB member, because what we're trying to do, when you look at, like we just did a webinar last week with Sheila Houston, an IB member in Kentucky, and the way she uses our solution, 90% of her conversations between her case management platform, Neos, and the Case Status app is being done through the app, through push notifications, 100% encryption, not happening via email, not happening via text. So she's in Kentucky, but this is the Florida, like it takes the spirit of what we're trying to do to mitigate that risk, because a lot of the cases I've heard of actually are coming from the client side of that email coming through. The client's emails come back. Think about how many clients you have, and think about how they're using Yahoo and Gmail, right? They're not doing the due diligence as a company or a going concern is. They're just an individual. They are likely to potentially get hacked and then bring that infection into your space. So the more and more we can do to mitigate the risk that the FBI and the CISA are talking about using these new technologies, I'm not saying you should do it tomorrow, but you should heavily consider where that fits into a long-range plan investment to help hedge some of the challenges that we face. Last thing I'm going to leave as a note, again, is a public service announcement that we sort of talk about. A lot of SaaS providers in your tech stack, I would imagine, every time I talk to an IB member attorney and we talk about technology, there's a lot of things out there that we're putting together to do different functions, because there's not just one technology that does everything you need to do. Most of this stuff is in the cloud. Most of it is software as a service. My ask of you as you go through this is at least to put your potential vendors or your current vendors through their paces on the idea of SOC 2 Type 2. So we have our accounting brothers and sisters to thank 20 years ago. They're the ones that initiated this type of standard, because who's better to put a value on risk than people who are doing the accounting and measuring the money day in and day out. And so SAS 70, I think it was from the middle 2010, sort of germinated as a standard to say, look, we need to diversify the risk of what's going on in the cloud, data in motion, data at rest, and we need to make sure it's secure. So it's not a guarantee, but it ensures that the providers that you have are adhering to the highest known standard that continues to evolve. SAS 70 has become SOC 2 Type 2, and you have big firms out there like SecureFrame that measure against that standard, put a case status, put a file line, put a litify through their paces on a regular basis to make sure that a lot of the things we talked about before are being implemented at the SaaS provider, because you don't want that cloud data to be at risk. So make sure that that you are asking about that, asking what their plan is, how do they adhere to that, and they should be able to show you reports, show you how they're diversifying that risk. It is good due diligence as you bring on different technology partners into your tech stack. So again, I'm pretty passionate about this. I've been in tech for 2.5 decades, and the last company I worked with, this was important and made a big difference in diversifying the risk. All right. Harrison and Jack, I think people have heard enough of my voice. So we're going to talk a little bit about some of the expertise that you guys bring to bear on remediation. And I have to say, the thing that I've liked about meeting y'all, it's not just about signing a policy. It is about servicing that policy and helping when these things pop up. So I'll drive, but I'll let you guys maybe take the lead on this conversation.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. I'll give a real quick background on cyber insurance in general. I started in this business in 2011, and it had just come out as a product through Lloyd's of London, and the premiums were initially extremely high, and candidly, the interest from the consumer was very low. 15 years ago, I would walk into a law firm, and generally the conversation would be centered around malpractice insurance, which of course has been around for decades, and is what traditionally has kept law firms up at night. And I would talk about cyber and present a cyber proposal, and I would say 90% of firms, candidly just weren't interested in it, and didn't see the need for why would a small to medium-sized law firm, need a cyber liability policy. And now fast forward to today, I would say in the last 4 years or so, COVID probably accelerated it with remote work and whatnot. Now I would say those numbers are inverse, and I would say 90% of law firms see the need, see the value, take this very seriously, and realize that, honestly, this might be a more important insurance policy than malpractice. I mean, you're never going to drop malpractice. I'm not trying to throw that to the side, but I see more cyber claims, and I think Harrison would agree. We probably see more cyber activity in our office from a claim standpoint nowadays than malpractice claims. So that's kind of a backstory on the coverage and when it's originated. If you want to go to the next slide, I can kind of talk about where it is today. So now there are more than 10 carriers that write this coverage for law firms, which has been good. It's been a positive. The coverages have evolved and gotten more sophisticated as more claims have been understood and received by the insurance companies, right? So originally, some of the coverages never even seen these types of claims, and now that thousands of claims have played out, carriers have evolved, and of course, like any marketplace, as more enter it, rates get more competitive. The policies themselves get better from a coverage standpoint, and like I said, now it's much more mainstream, and I would say a lot more firms are buying it than ever before. And we can quote it off of very limited information, really firm size, revenues. What's interesting is the insurance companies now will run a soft penetration test of the firm's systems before providing a quote. So if Case Status, as an example, said we want a cyber insurance quote, I would send that to our underwriters. They would then, basically tap into Case Status's network and sort of run a soft test of the network before they decide if they're willing to provide a quote or not, and then base the premium on how sophisticated and how well the defenses are of the network. So that's sort of an overview of cyber liability today. It's certainly come a long way and continues to evolve.
Yeah, and to Jack's point, the evolution has really happened in the last 10 years. If you're on the next slide there, Paul, if you look at really what a policy covers, plenty of firms purchase a policy, but it's a little more granular on what is covered in that policy. And if you look at the policy as sort of a grouping of modules, so a firm may have a $3 million cyber liability policy. That $3 million gets stretched out over a variety of different sort of caveats. And so you have the initial loss. So let's say you have a ransomware claim and you have a demand for $1 million. So you pay the initial loss, which is that hard cost, but you also have really $2 million left over in this $3 million policy to pay for other sort of items. Those could be the remediation phase, which includes hardware, software costs. It includes client notification. It includes regulatory expenses. It can include public relations, theft monitoring. It also could include credit monitoring for any affected individuals that you would have on your network if their PII was compromised. So again, you have this initial loss that the policy does cover. And again, as recent as this morning, I'm working through it with another client. You cover that, but you also have more that gets you back up and running, gets you into that betterment phase that you hope to be in post data breach. So the policy does see you through. It does get you back to the point you were prior to the data breach. Again, paying that hard cost, that initial loss, plus whatever it really costs to get you to that point up to the full policy limits. Next slide.
Yeah, and I'll touch on just these are a few different common claims that we see with our firms, and all of these are covered, under a comprehensive cyber policy. But the first one being wire fraud, and we see it a lot with real estate closings or settlement of cases, and it'll be a classic scenario where the morning that a wire is supposed to go out, somebody in the firm's accounting department will get an email. It'll say, hey, John, the wire instructions have changed. Please use these instead. And every firm's policy should be that is a massive red flag, and you need to pick up the phone and call that person and verify. Call somebody that you know, and also don't call the number that's in that email. You need to go online and find the number, that's definitely from a trusted source as opposed to this email. But I had a client this week that just sent out a bad wire. And as we all know, I would say 9 times out of 10, once that money is sent out, it's not recoverable. Occasionally it is, but generally speaking, it gets offshore quickly and they close the account and it's gone. So insurance will pay for that type of claim. The second one we've already touched on a little bit, but a ransomware claim where they get into your firm system and they shut it down and they demand a ransomware payment to unlock the system. And give you the key back, so to speak, and get you back up and running. So like we sort of touched on, the carrier really covers all phases of that claim: the business interruption aspect, the actual ransom payment itself. Of course, they try and negotiate it with the bad actor and get the payment down. And then even things such as having to upgrade your software system as a result and buy new equipment, it pays for that sort of thing. So there's a lot more that goes into the insurance payment than just the actual ransom demand itself.
So Jack, real quick question.
Yeah, go ahead, Paul.
Quick question coming in from the queue of just the incident versus breach as you go through these. I guess the question is on that idea of loss of that personal or that sensitive information. Are all of these loss scenarios breaches by that definition, or are some of them even incidents that you guys would, help in a loss scenario, monetarily speaking, or the policy would help?
Yeah, so that's a great comment. These obviously it's not rocket science. These insurance companies, they know that their best protection is to try and limit something as early as possible, right? So they encourage their insureds, their law firm clients, to reach out as soon as there's anything that seems suspicious or that's gone wrong, so that they can hopefully, end it right there before it becomes a full-blown breach. All these carriers, we'll talk about this a little bit later, but Harrison and I always want to be available for our clients and always tell them to call us first. But the reality is all these insurance policies, cyber insurance policies, have 24/7 hotlines that law firms can call. It can be a Saturday at midnight, and somebody's going to answer the phone, because a lot of times that's when these cyber attacks happen. These bad actors are fairly sophisticated, and they know nobody's working on a Friday night, generally speaking. And so that's when their best chance is to infiltrate a system and have a day or so to go unnoticed.
Great, thank you for that. I think that clarifies it up. It's not as if you define an incident or a breach and then contact you guys, it's as soon as you have any signals, bring in pros, right, and get them to inspect and figure out what to do next. I think that's
if I can, let me add to that. To Jack's point, it's going to happen after hours or usually on a weekend, and you do call the carrier directly. There is a hotline. It is manned so that someone will call you back, or at least an adjuster will call you back really very quickly. What they do is they will really quarterback, with our help, really a response team. And so if you, from the time the original notice goes in, so take the one I had today, the notice came in at 11 o'clock. We had a phone call by noon with the firm, the carrier, their appointed legal counsel, the forensic expert, and I think even someone from law enforcement. And it's sort of that response, how are we going to handle this and make sure everyone's on the same page with what those next steps need to be. So from the moment the initial loss is or the initial breach is discovered, you really within a few hours tops, I would say, have your team together, and someone is going to determine, usually the carrier or your legal counsel is going to determine how that process is going to unfold. The first step really in the ransomware is to negotiate what the loss looks like with the fraudster. That could take up a couple of days. They submit payment, and then it's the remediation of getting your firm again back to where it was prior to the breach. As a lot of the people on this webinar know by now, you know, the cybersecurity area of practice of a law firm has really blown up, and so you do have specialized firms, obviously, that do have pretty common, history of working with bad actors, working in this space. They know what they're doing, and they know how the process is going to unfold. So again, it is a process. I would say from the time of the initial breach to the time you're back in your system is probably a week to 10 days. That full remediation process could take about 6 months, depending on how complicated it is. But for a multi-million-dollar claim, that's not a huge amount of time. And so, yes, it doesn't happen quickly enough to someone who can't access their network, but at the same time, for an incident where up to $3 million, $5 million is being exchanged, I think 1 week is sort of acceptable.
Makes sense. No, I appreciate you guys answering that question. Sorry if I injected it at the wrong time and disrupted the flow, but good stuff.
No, that's a great question.
No, and Harrison, you want to take the last two loss scenarios there?
Yeah, so remote exposure is just what we talked about. It's utilizing, not utilizing VPN. It's the example I gave a few slides ago, where you're accessing sensitive information either via a public network or via your home Wi-Fi. And then email hack is either stolen IP, corporate records, financial data. Is pretty self-explanatory. These, going back to your point, Paul, about incident versus a breach, those two are probably more on the incident side. They can be easily contained depending on what information is compromised. But I would think those two are certainly on the lesser level of serious incidents.
Yeah.
And then, so next slide here.
Yeah, and I can touch on this. We sort of already talked about it, but I think it's very worth repeating. I know there's always a misconception or a fear out there with insurance policies that, oh, if I report something to my insurance company, I'm either going to get dropped or my rate's going to triple at renewal or something like that. People think of car insurance and bad, have some trauma there. But with cyber insurance, again, to reiterate what we mentioned earlier, if there's anything suspicious going on, the carrier would much rather you go ahead and make the call, notify them, let them take a look at your system, see what's going on, and get experts involved. Like I said, these claims, the longer they go being undetected, my light just turned off because I didn't move. The longer they go undetected, the worse, the claim's going to be, and the larger the payment's going to be for the insurance company. So, always feel free to call us, Harrison or I, as your broker. That's a good place to start. But of course, like I said, these insurance companies, the cyber policies have 24/7 hotlines to call where somebody will be able to answer your call and walk you through the best steps to try and remediate something. Harrison, I don't know if you have anything to add there.
Like we have a question. How does a firm know its level of risk readiness? If I'm understanding the question, I don't know if it's possible to understand that without doing your sort of disaster recovery plan, or however you want to define that, doomsday plan. Did Jack or Paul, do you have any input on that? I mean,
one thing I'll touch on, and sorry, Paul, and then I'll let you go. I think, again, these risk assessments that we get provided by the insurance companies, I think are a good starting point. for a firm that's never bought this coverage before, just because it tells you, it gives you, again, a rough overview of, where you fall in relation to your peer group. And it's usually out of a 0 to 100. So some firms, their reports come back and they're in the 80 or the 90s, and that means they have really good systems in place. Other firms sometimes, as you know, Harrison, I mean, they come back and the reports are in the 40s. And so we say, hey, you need to send this to your IT provider and fix some of these glaring deficiencies, with your defense system. So I don't know if that's where the question was going, but I at least
that actually makes more sense on what I think that the request was. Yeah, I think that makes sense. And even when you complete a cyber application, you get asked 10 different questions with different caveats about, do you have X, Y, and Z protocols, or are you following X, Y, Z procedure? That's also a great starting point if you're not familiar with, what I need to have, because unless you select a favorable response to any of these questions, you're really not qualifying for cyber insurance. So it's kind of a good starting point. Do you have MFA? If you hit no, you can't move on. I mean, there's just no way to get coverage after that. So those are good questions, and I'd be happy if anyone wanted to see sort of a more robust cyber application, not necessarily one that you would need to obtain coverage, but one that I think has the most, relevant questions. We'd be happy to send it out.
Yeah, I think that's due diligence. That's way beyond, or much more feasible than what I was going to talk about as a SaaS provider. But we certainly, if you want to take it to the next level and have a penetration test, there are providers out there that will emulate. They can't necessarily, do the social engineering per se, but they can put your defenses to test. And those are usually pretty costly, though, and usually reserved for technology solutions, not professional services. So I think Harrison and Jack, what you guys outlined, makes a lot more sense. The questionnaires are going to let folks know where they stand. Cool. All right. Well, I think we're close to landing the plane. Carla, thanks for letting us know about the question in the queue. So we've got a little bit of more time if there are more questions in the queue, but we wanted to close with some of the key takeaways from today's session. As we've talked about, anywhere and everywhere, evaluate risk, mitigate risk, prevent risk, clearly just having a core philosophy, having these conversations, understanding what's out there and what your peers are seeing is the first great place to start. So put that energy into action. As I said before, look at your cloud providers, evaluate and mandate that they adhere to SOC 2 Type 2, that they have that audit. That's where it gets really specific for your providers, because you don't want them to be the weak link in your chain. You can do all this due diligence, but you put something in your tech stack and expose it to, not a good idea. Limit email and text with clients where you can. I know this is really hard because this is just, if we're using traditional methods, phone calls, emails, texts, they are the anchor of every law firm. But start to look at ways to diversify it. Of course, us at Case Status, we'd love to chat about what we can do as an injury board partner. It's way more than just communication, so we understand that. But it is an interesting area, and I've even talked to Harrison and Jack about how things like that reduce premiums because they're reducing risk, right? So that is known by the policymakers, that when you can get 90% of your client communications happening via a secure channel, the insurance providers take notice in that. And again, we're not talking about big dollars, but we should just understand that they're saying, yeah, your risk goes down, and they know that. So think about email, think about text, think about how your bar is giving guidance on those two things. Insurance, of course. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
No. I'm sorry, Paul. I was going to address a question.
Oh yeah.
How do we get analysis of whether our current cyber insurance is good or not? We use Coalition. Coalition is a great carrier. We place a lot of business with them. I think they're probably the most robust in the cyber arena. That said, I think, to the level of, you're talking about good and good. I mean, so many of them are great options, so that at some point you're just now getting down to price. But if I was going to use the substance of a policy out of anyone, I think Coalition is the best.
And good that, no, it's good. I mean, I think it's a point that, Wayne, you're on the right path having it there, right? So I know that SGP will give you a lot of free analysis of where you are. I think the real question is folks that don't even have it, right? I think we didn't even hit on that stat, but there are a lot of law firms out there that aren't protected on these things, and that's the scariest part. All right, so protect your business. If you're one of those firms out there, hopefully not, get that protected, and then be vigilant, as we've talked about. Again, there's a lot embedded in that statement. Easy for Paul to say here, but train your staff. Again, we alluded to preferred providers. I know Jack and Harrison can put you in touch with those types of folks, and they have these great training programs, right? They're built. They just remind people, and that training goes a long way, because again, a lot of these attacks are using your good employees, your good human capital against you. And the more that you can make them strong against these attacks, the better firewall you have. With that said, Carla, good to see you back. I think we're good on the Q&A, but we wanted to close with any more questions that are in the queue. And of course, if you want to continue the conversation, Harrison, Jack, and I are readily available. But Carla, I'll put you back in the driver's seat.
Oh, thank you, Paul, Harrison, Jack. This was fantastic. I so appreciate you spending some time with us and sharing your insights and expertise. That's it for the webinar. If we don't have any further questions, we'll go ahead and end the meeting, but please do reach out to these gentlemen. If you want me to put you in touch with them, I'm happy to do that as well. All right, everybody. Take care, and thanks so much for
Carla.
joining.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you all. Appreciate it.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.